sequence of crime today.
Okay.
All right, well, welcome to Preppers, and we're talking about an ancient hatred today, and I hope that it's going to be really enlightening for you. So, Hitler was one of the most notorious anti-Semites who ever lived, of course, because we all know him, but he was not the originator of this ancient hatred. And no one can really determine the origins of Hitler's hatred for the Jews, but suffice it to say that it was really nothing new in his day, and it had been going on for close to 2 millennia, as Mary Ann said, really from day one from the garden. And so Hitler summed up this sentiment chillingly in a private conversation with his confidant, Hermann Rauschning, when he said this. And I have one for that. It says, "The struggle for world domination is between me and the Jews. All else is meaningless. The Jews have inflicted 2 wounds on the world: circumcision for the body and conscience for the soul. I come to free mankind from their shackles."
Wow.
Now, I had never heard this quote before, and as much as we all know about Hitler, this just was the cap on the astonishment. Yes.
He wanted to exterminate the Jews because, he says, because of them, morality came into the world.
Are you going to preach this or am He always jumps ahead of me.
I don't know what you're going to say.
That's right, so be quiet. All right, so this showed us what a God-hater he was. And he says, the Jew has inflicted upon the world conscience of the soul. And so he wanted to be free, himself and the world free of their shackles of conscience of the soul. So the Jews were very successful in Germany at that time. But there were 79 million people in Germany prior to World War II. There were 318,000 Jews in 1939. That's it. So concerning circumcision, once again, he said this. He said, "Circumcision for the body and conscience for the soul. I come to free mankind from their shackles." So for centuries, the foreskin was considered a sign of civility and masculinity, and especially throughout the Greco-Roman Empire. So do you think that that's what Hitler was thinking, that circumcision was a degradation of manhood? Perhaps, because I don't see why he would be so upset about circumcision, right? And so everywhere else he elaborated further, and I have a slide on this one. He said, "Providence has ordained that I should be the greatest liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortification of a false vision called conscience and morality, and from the demands of a freedom and independence that only a very few can bear." Do I need to read that again? Let's read it again. "Providence has ordained that I should be the greatest liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortification of a false vision called conscience and morality, and from the demands of a freedom and independence that only a very few can bear." So he viewed concepts like conscience, morality, and individual freedoms as obstacles to his vision of a totalitarian state. So by dismissing these values as dirty and degrading, Hitler sought to justify his authoritarian rule and suppression of dissent. He believed that only a select few could handle the true freedom and independence, implying that most people needed to be controlled or led by a strong centralized authority. And guess who that was? It was himself. So much of his founding beliefs are believed to have come from the mayor of Vienna in Austria. And all imperial nations in history have had this very same view, that murdering people are for the good of the whole, just as we saw this weekend in the massacre of Christians and Alawites in Syria. So Adolf Hitler was influenced by Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, from 1897 to 1910. So Lueger was known for his anti-Semitic rhetoric and policies, which he used to gain political support among the lower middle class. As in the case of Hitler, we really don't know why, but Hitler admired Lueger's ability to manipulate public opinion and his use of anti-Semitism as a political tool. So while Lueger's anti-Semitism was more optimistic, yes,
Just out of curiosity, how old was Hitler during this?
he's got to be young. I'm not sure, but I would think
He was
so.
in his early 20s.
Yeah, I would think he's really young.
Maybe even late teens, because he was in his 20s during World War I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's in Austria trying to be an artist.
Well, he was Austrian by birth.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It really connects you that there's nothing new under the
No,
sun, like you
absolutely
say, and
not.
that's how these people are thinking today.
absolutely, yes, and you're gonna start seeing that. So Hitler, admired Lueger, and really he was a model for Hitler, and this is where it all started. And this propaganda, was just adopted by Hitler. So just like you said, there's nothing new under the sun, that God told us that. But Lueger, what he did was he falsely accused the Jews who opposed him as imposing false standards on society. That's what he said, that they were imposing false standards. Are you seeing what Hitler said?
Mm-hmm.
And then Lueger said false standards on society?
We see the same thing today.
Exactly.
He also hated Christianity. He used Rome because he signed a concordance with the Catholic Church, making Catholicism the only legal faith in Germany. But when you understand Catholicism, it's all about suppression of freedom of thought, and it went right along with that.
So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So what is this standards, of society that Hitler and Lueger are talking about? They're talking about the Ten Commandments. They're talking about the law of God.
Well, and I didn't think the Jews were trying to impose that on everybody else.
They're
They were
not.
trying to impose it on themselves.
They're not, and we're going to see that.
We see the same thing with the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
They are anti-God. They're God haters for the most part.
Yeah.
And those that are what we call middle Democrats, they're faced with a choice. Either they succumb to that, become that themselves, or they're gonna have to leave that party, because that party is based on communism.
Yeah.
And communism is all about self and then being governed by a few elite.
And I don't want to get off into politics, but I'm going to throw this in here since you brought it up. Did you see Schumer this morning? He's fighting against this government shutdown. He's trying to get the government to shut down.
Yeah.
So they played a clip where when Biden was in place, he was, we can't have the government shut down. I mean, just a flip-flop. And then they were talking about how Pelosi and Schumer, and they were saying publicly that they were going to try to do something about government waste and spending. Well, now they're all in an uproar that we found all these billions and dollars being wasted. They're liars.
It's a $500 billion right now, and he's just getting started.
I mean, they lie flat out to your face. They just lie. Anyway, okay, so the Jews had assimilated almost perfectly into German life in most countries. And just like I've only known a few Jews in my whole life, but the ones that I knew, I would have never known they were Jews because they didn't live like a Jew. You know what I mean? And but yet, and in Germany during this time, most of them still adhered to the law of Moses. They cared for the sick, the infirm, the weak, the disabled, and yet this was totally contrary to Hitler's beliefs that all of these should be destroyed. If you were infirmed, you should be destroyed. And so he wanted to rid the world of these restraints that the Jews brought and this dirty and degrading self-mortification. That's what he said. So the Jews They had their own calendar, they had their own holidays, they had their own diet, they had many other things that set them apart from a complete and total assimilation. They could not intermarry with non-Jews. Mary Ann was married to a Jew. He shouldn't have married her. But some of them did. But for this precise reason, see, God had a plan. It wasn't He was trying to punish anybody. He was wanting them to stay pure. He was wanting, they were His people. They were to be set apart. They were to live differently. And so these beliefs just flew in the face of Hitler. And so he couldn't succeed in his plan for annihilation and the advancement of his Uber race while the Jews were living in opposition to him. And their lifestyle was in opposition to him. So it is said that the quote, "A Jew means to make the world a better place." So Jews were and are on the front of social causes, and we see that in Israel today. And of course, I wouldn't know that except for I see it on the 700 Club. And a lot of times they'll show groups in Israel and what they're doing to help their mankind and everything. And in fact, there are cases where I saw this on several occasions where the Palestinians receive special medical treatment in Israel, in Israeli hospitals, especially with conditions that they can't treat locally. And so they try to live in peace. They do everything they can to live in peace with their enemies. And even the people that lived on the border of Gaza, I saw several interviews on 700 Club where these people living on that border, they would go and give people and take them, to hospitals and doctors and things like that and do things for them. And then how about the IDF? They flyer everywhere they go, Gaza everywhere. Before they bomb them, they flyer and tell them to get out. Well, you're telling the enemy to get out because everybody there is their enemy.
We did the same thing in Japan before we dropped the bombs on Nagasaki, Hiroshima. We
Did we
fly
really?
for 2 weeks to get out of there.
Oh, wow. I didn't.
Yeah.
So as early as August of 1920, Hitler compared the Jews to germs.
Oh,
And he stated that diseases cannot be controlled unless you utterly destroy their causes. So listen to what he says, and I got a screen one for this. He says the influence of the Jews would never disappear without removing its cause, the Jew, from our midst. So these radical ideas, they paved the way for the mass murder of the Jews in the 1940s. And this was written while he was in the military during World War I, where it was said that he often riled up the troops with his rhetoric and while he was in the Army. And then the Army realized he had a talent, for speaking. And so they began to really use him and to speak and used his oratory talents. But speaking of germs, though, the Jews were blamed for the Black Death plague in the 14th century because they didn't know where it came from. And you got to blame somebody, right? And of course, knowing what we just went through with COVID, we're trying to blame somebody. It's just natural that you want to know where this came from. And but the funny thing was the reason they got blamed for it was because they were not dying from it. A few, but not like they were, not like everybody else. So why do you think this was? Why weren't they dying from it like everybody else?
Their health and sanitary laws.
Because God had instituted the sanitation to wash their hands and all this stuff. And so that's why they weren't dying from it.
Well, and come to find out, it was from the rats that were carrying it, and if their homes were cleaner, they probably had less rats in their homes.
Yes.
Which promoted the disease.
Yes.
And you realize one of the rats that had the disease, it was the
The
fleas.
fleas
on
that
it.
were on the
Yeah.
rats.
Yeah.
So
And
cleanliness is
another
next to
interesting-
godliness.
When speaking of circumcision, in males that are circumcised, penile cancer is almost unheard of.
Really?
It's mostly in men who are uncircumcised.
Well, I
And
don't
why
know
would
what
the-
war it was, but the men, because they couldn't bathe properly at all, they started circumcising them because they were getting infected.
Oh.
So they did this to help their health.
And why would Hitler care if the Jews were circumcising
That-
themselves?
that's a-
You know,
that-
they weren't telling everybody else
Well,
to
it's
do
not
this.
logical. It's not logical. So we're
Exactly.
gonna see more and more it's supernatural. It's not logical.
Now,
So,
he admired America only because of its size, but he hated our form of government because it was based on Judeo-Christian.
which we're gonna talk
Yeah.
about too.
Yeah.
So I heard somebody say this, I thought this was so good. Palestine wants genocide. They want to wipe out an entire group of people, but they can't. Israel can, but won't. Israel could wipe them out.
Yes, they could.
Yeah,
And to show you how, it's just the spirit behind this thing, in the last year of World War II, when the army was, trying to get supplies to the front lines, I'm talking about the German army, their commitment to eradicate the Jews starved the army of supplies they needed to fight the Russians. Because they wanted those trains to keep the death camps full, to keep killing as many Jews as they possibly could. And there was over 6 million Jews killed, but you realize there was 12 million killed in all. Because they killed everybody they thought that was inferior, a lot of Slavics and, what do you call those people, gypsies and that sort of
oh,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, the Egyptians.
Blacks, they killed blacks.
Yeah, oh, yeah, they killed everybody that was not considered
Aryan.
Aryan, a pure Aryan race, which.
So let's back up a great deal and let's go back to Moses and the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. So in the biblical narrative, Moses ascended to the mountain and he heard the words of the Lord, and we know all that story. And God is speaking to the people through Moses. He's instructing Moses with the 10 Commandments written on 2 tablets of stone. And these were I think you could say this was the Jews' constitution. Those 2 tablets of stone. They were the laws that they were to live by. And they were the laws that they were to govern themselves by. And they were the laws that were to set them apart. So 4 of those commandments embodied their relationship to God. So he was their father, he was to be their father, he was to be their king. And the other 6 formed the ethical code for all of civilization, beginning with the Jew first. And they were to honor one's father and mother. Murder was forbidden, adultery and stealing forbidden, bearing false witness and coveting forbidden. So these 10 commandments became the foundation of Judaism. It was the genesis of ethical monotheism, the belief in one God. And these eventually became the foundation of Western society. They're our foundation. And these were the very ethics that Hitler hated so vehemently. And he literally stood on the hatred of those ethics to conquer the world. It's astounding. And so, in fact, in 2023, the homicide rate among Jews and other non-Arab ethnic groups in Israel, and I have a slide for that, this is astounding. So I'm talking about Jews and non-Arab ethnic groups in Israel was 0.85 murders per 100,000 people. So this rate is significantly lower compared to the Arab population in Israel, where the homicide rate was 13 times higher among Arab people in Israel. So in 2023, the violent crime rate in the United States was approximately 380.7 incidents per 100,000 people. 0.85 per 100,000 compared to 380.7 per 100,000 people. Do you think the 10 Commandments might just benefit a society?
But one says murders and the other says
Yeah,
incidents.
I said that. I didn't realize that till this morning, and I saw that, and I thought, what? And I didn't have time to look it up. That's what it said, incidents. But whether it's a murder or an incident, I'm just showing you that the 10 Commandments, that any society that will live as far much as you can, the 10 Commandments is a better society for it. So recognizing, unlike Hitler, that there was great value to all civilization in these 10 Commandments, John Adams, the second president of the United States, who became president in 1797, he writes this, and I was one for this. He said, I will insist the Hebrews have contributed more to civilized men than any other nation. If I was an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing nations. They have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern.
Who was that?
That was John Adams. So, see, Hitler didn't invent this hatred of the Jews. See, so it's an ancient hatred that just goes back millennia. So Jews in Europe had been the victims of discrimination and persecution since the Middle Ages, and often for religious reasons, and we're going to go back further than this. So by working our way backwards, examining the Middle Ages, Catholics saw the Jewish faith as an aberration that had to be squashed. So Jews were sometimes forced to convert to Catholicism, or they were not allowed to practice certain professions. They were often barred from holding government or military positions. They were excluded from guilds, which are like unions, which controlled many trades. Farming was almost a very uncommon thing among the Jews because of restrictions on land ownership. And now you can begin to see why the Jews were forced into professions that added the notion of greed, right? They got that label of greedy Jews. See, and I believe it was partly because of this persecution, but it was also because they were God's chosen people. And I believe they are still blessed today with money and talent if one will just apply themselves. And so this literally provoked the world to hatred, which was in truth fueled by jealousy. And so you've all heard the stories and you've seen the movies that Jesus was crucified by the, well, we know he was crucified by the Romans, right? But there was a movement for a long time that it was the Jews who crucified Jesus, okay? And we know it was really the Jewish leadership, right? The high priest and everything. So, but this was the birth of Christianity, Jesus' death and resurrection, and this further was cemented in society by the teaching of the Apostle Paul. And at first, the religion, we're just going to call it religion for the sake of argument, was rejected by Rome. Rome rejected Christianity, and Rome had been very open to most religions. And because as they would conquer different people, they would allow them to continue to practice their religion. And then Rome would even embrace those religions sometimes, and they would incorporate them into their own current beliefs sometimes if they could be incorporated. So you can see through the words of the Bible that Rome pretty much ignored the Jew, all right, until it got to be a problem. And it really didn't get to be a problem until Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, which was the start of the division. And then Paul and the other disciples and apostles, they just further escalated the climate and division that naturally ensued, which the Romans then perceived as a problem. But initially, see, early Christians were not considered members of a separate religion. Instead, they were seen as members of a somewhat radical Jewish sect. And so this would explain why both the traditional Jewish community and the pagan Romans considered early Christians as troublesome politicians and religious agitators. So in fact, Christianity was seen as a threat. And Christianity really caused a big stir, and it divided then further the Jews from the Christians, as well as the Christians from the heathen, idol-worshiping Gentiles. And Rome did not like this disturbance in their empire. And so they set out to just squash Christianity, which they deemed to be the problem. So let's drill down to see how Rome perceived this new religion, as well as the Jewish religion, and why they determined to stop it. So it's imperative that we understand that the ancient Romans worshipped many gods, male and female. And when they conquered an area, they allowed the continued worship of those gods of their conquered people. But remember, see, Rome was a heathen, idolatrous nation, just like the ones that they conquered. So as long as they obeyed, as long as they showed respect and worship for Caesar, then they were left alone.
Yeah.
But many times the Romans, because they were a polytheistic society, which means they worshiped many gods, see, that's why they were able to incorporate some of the beliefs of the other peoples that they conquered. But Judaism and Christianity is not polytheistic. It's monotheistic, okay? And the Christians believe in God in 3 persons, and Judaism believes in God and the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the divine inspiration of the presence of God that empowers. Now, that is not the same belief in the 3rd member of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. Okay, it's like a God spirit, a God essence. And so it's not the same. But this monotheistic view, see, could not be incorporated into Rome's worship.
Yeah.
Because it's the one true God for the Jews and the Christians, and over here in Rome, it's all these gods. You can't marry those two; they won't go together. And so this is huge. This was the dividing line. This is what got Rome so upset.
Yeah.
So one goddess that the Romans highly venerated was the goddess of Isis, and she was associated with motherhood and protection. And some think that the worship of Mary in Catholicism, originating in Rome, stemmed from this worship of Isis. And you can see that by adapting an already ingrained belief and custom was easily morphed into this new religion of Catholicism with Mary in this prominent position, and as they saw it, just an offshoot of Christianity. So they simply replaced Isis with Mary. And to be more compatible in this state religion, because this is what they did on a regular basis. And so I really think that had not this been the case, that had they not already been very familiar with Isis worship, then Catholicism wouldn't have had a chance, because it was just the merging of 2 religions together. Mm-hmm.
And the pagan religions, even in China, you had, was it the Musha, Sun? You had the goddess with the infant child. Same thing with Isis. You had her in pagan Rome and going back to Egypt with the child in her arms. So that is, she's right, that's exactly what they did. They just changed the name of Isis to Mary.
And the mother with the child was very innocent,
Yeah.
precious.
When the Catholic priests went into China, they found carvings that were 1,500 years old with the woman holding the child with a halo over her head. It's not Christian whatsoever.
And if you ever get to go to Tennessee, where is it in Tennessee? The Parthenon?
No, it's in Nashville.
Go to, what's it called? Oh, well, it's the Parthenon in Tennessee. It's a replica of the Parthenon that
To full scale.
to full scale that they did in for the World's Fair.
In the 1890s, it's still there.
It is astonishing. And is that Isis that because she's holding a,
She was called another name by then, but she's got another little god in the palm of her hand
Yeah.
that is 6 feet tall in her palm, because this statue of our Athena, I think it is,
okay,
is 60 feet high.
you
And
gotta
there were
see
people
it.
in there being real quiet, like it was.
Oh
a
my
church.
gosh, it was like going into some big, religious cathedral where, the spirit in there is different. It's something to see. You won't believe it.
Why in the world we would have built something like that? It's
Yeah.
patterned after one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Yeah.
The Parthenon.
So if you want to see one of the 7 wonders of the world, go to Nashville and see it. I'm telling you, it's worth your time to go. So this new religion, see, it was filled with politics and power, and I'm talking about the Catholic. I'm not talking about Christian, I'm talking about Catholic. And now I want to ask you, who do you think would try to pervert true Christianity and bring forth this offshoot, because that's what they thought it was, an offshoot of Christianity called Catholicism? Who do you think that might be?
Mankind.
Well, mankind, but Satan, right? He's the author of this. So Nero, from 54 to 68 AD, he became infamous as the first Roman emperor to persecute Christians. And he set fire to Rome, he blamed the Christians, and again, the crux of the entire matter was the fact that Rome was polytheistic. So they believed and worshiped many gods, and this really sheds a lot of light on the persecution of the Christians and the Jews, because both of them being monotheistic, believing in one true God, see, they would not worship the gods that Rome worshipped. And so they began to get blamed for everything. If the weather was bad, if they had, if something, I don't know what they had or what that kind of weather they have over there, but, a drought or whatever, they got blamed for it because they thought that the Christians and the Jews weren't appeasing the gods. And so that therefore they were being killed, they were being tortured. That's what the Colosseum was all about. That was throwing Christians to the lions. And I think first of all it was to appease the gods that they were doing this, and second of all I think it was to provide entertainment for the bloodthirsty crowd. But do you see the correlation with the ancient Roman citizens and the people of Gaza today?
Yes.
See, this inhumane treatment and hatred is nothing new. And actually it goes back to Cain. And so eventually, over many centuries, eventual acceptance and dominance took place for Christianity. But Christianity, of course, is proven to always flourish under persecution. That's just a fact. And that's because God is the one that calls and equips, and He is not going to allow His truth to die out. So the true Christian belief was spread through its citizens in a grassroots spread. But at some point in time, Catholicism began as an offshoot, and it began to grow. So a mixture by the citizens of Rome by simply incorporating this new goddess Mary. See how easy that was? I can incorporate Christianity in this new offshoot. I'll just worship Mary, right? And then they did believe in, Jesus. They accepted that so I can worship this goddess Mary with this new God-man Jesus, and it easily fits into their polytheistic beliefs. And so in my opinion, just adding one more god to their plethora of gods, just like in India today.
Yeah.
And I saw during the first Trump administration that some in India had made Trump a god, and they were worshiping him. So, see, to them it's no big deal to worship one more god, one more false god. So Trump was the latest one. But as possible enlightenment of the Jews and Christians in their way of charity, their tolerance, and their cleanliness, see, it could be that politicians began seeing some benefit to it. Okay, well, and you know how things go and progress. And so maybe even in their social appeal to love and tolerance. But the biggest push was when the Emperor Constantine in 313 AD converted to Catholicism. And in truth, it's believed that he really converted just for political advantage. And that was in the early 4th century. And by the 4th century, Emperor Theodosius declared Catholicism the official religion of the Roman Empire, like Pastor Jeff said. So this was the foundation.
We call it Christianity, but it was.
If you look it up, they call it Christianity, but it wasn't. It was Catholicism.
It would morph into that, yep.
So this was the foundation for the spread of Catholicism across Europe and beyond. But this further alienated the Jews. All right, and Catholics have Mary, and but the Jews don't acknowledge Mary. So you see where the conflict is going to come in. And so now one thing I want everyone to understand is that, just like we said, there's a great misunderstanding and controversy as to whether Christianity is meant by the true meaning of the word where Rome is concerned, or what is really meant was Catholicism. So everything you read, it'll say Christianity, but that wasn't it. It was Catholicism.
It wasn't biblical Christianity.
No, that was the official religion. It became Catholicism. So according to Catholic websites, Emperor Theodosius was Catholic. So I looked it up to see what the Catholics say, and they don't say Christian, they say Catholic. Our Christian websites say Christian. Our Catholic websites say Catholic. Okay, you can look it up yourself.
But weren't they all Catholic at that time? There was no other Christians.
Well, the Christians were being thrown to the lions and all that, so I'm sure, there's always been Christians, pockets of Christians, but the official religion was Catholicism, and you'd be killed if you weren't Catholic.
Yeah, but there
So-
weren't any other denominations, there weren't any.
Well, I'm sure not legally,
No.
not legally.
That was, I'll tell you what church that was, that became the state church. That was that would have been the Church of Pergamos. The church under the imperial favor settled in the world, AD 316 to the end. And then you had the message to the Thyatira, which was that became what the church state, which you still have today, the state church in like countries like, well, throughout Europe. But then you had the Thyatira was the Roman church, the Catholic church. Both of them still exist today.
So, under the rule of Catholicism in Rome, the Jews often lived in despised minority. And they faced religious antagonism, they endured social and economic discrimination, and internally, however, Judaism flourished, just like Christianity flourishes, even under persecution. So during this time is when Jews compiled sacred literature such as the Babylonian Talmud, their core central text of rabbinic Judaism is what they use in that Babylonian Talmud. It's a primary source of Jewish religious law and theology. So they even flourished. So the Catholic Church claims to have started on the day of Pentecost. But Hollywood takes issue with that, and they trace the origin of the Catholic Church back to the female idol worship. And I think that is honestly more accurate. And so non-Catholic scholars state that the Emperor Constantine founded the Catholic Church. But yet there is no clear lineage from the apostles to the Pope. And thus the first officials of the Catholic Church was founded in the 4th century, a time when the spread of Catholicism among pagans became the norm. And the Catholic Church then and now embraces these traditions of pagans, but they focus on the religious significance of Jesus' resurrection. And I'm going to show you how. So this is something the Catholic Church has found in common with Islam. Who knows what the Catholic Church has in common with Islam?
Mary.
Mary. Islam venerates Mary. And understanding this polytheistic background, it starts to make sense why this Pope has made significant efforts to promote inter-religious dialogue. So, I hope this is going to start bringing to light how Pope Francis could say, quote, all religions are a path to God.
It's an interesting comment, really. Wanting to know more where his thoughts are on that. But then again, do I really want to go there?
I wouldn't waste my time. So Martin Luther, he was an excommunicated Catholic. He became the founder of the Lutheran Church, and he was a Jew hater. He despised them. He wrote down much of his hatred. He produced public displays of evil caricatures, flyers, books, so forth, that guess who would use? Hitler. Hitler used all of Martin Luther's stuff.
Wow.
And so I believe this view stemmed back to the ancient Rome and the Catholic Church's teachings, because the Catholics were the ones who were preaching against the Jews. They were the ones who were discriminating against the Jews. And so if you were a Jew, you had to convert to Catholicism. And so that you can see where the schism just grew and grew and grew between the Jews and Catholics in Rome. So I think this starts to make a great sense in understanding why the Catholic Church has a huge presence in the Holy Land today. And I've never been, but the things I've seen on TV, there's so much Catholic stuff, I thought I didn't even want to go. You know, they've taken over holy sites. They'll tell you this is the holy site, and then the Christians say, no, this is it. You know, and who's right? I'll tend to believe the
Yeah,
Christians.
And the whole thing, the Catholic Church wanted to always build a church over this
Yes.
historic
Yeah.
site. So you want to go see where Jesus was, whatever, and all you see is this Catholic Church. You
Exactly.
don't see anything of what it was.
Exactly.
You just see the church.
Exactly. So I think we forget before the word Catholic comes the word Roman.
Yeah.
Okay? I think we kind of forget that. And so Rome was the ruling power of the world, okay, during Jesus' day. And something to keep in mind is that the Roman Empire's goal was to rule the world.
Just wondered if you're gonna get into the Latin, where that works into the translations of the Bibles.
Well, I am gonna have mentioned that, but not in depth. But when I get there, you
Well,
comment.
I'm not really, I don't claim to have
Yeah.
any great understanding. What came first? Was it the Latin translation of the Bible and then,
Now, that's a Jeff question,
yeah.
because he'll know for sure. But, see, we need to keep that in mind. Rome's goal was to rule the world. What was
Yeah.
Hitler's goal? To rule the world, okay? So nothing's changed, if you get my drift. So they ruled the Holy Land, and they have a large hand in it today. So I thought, well, I want to know how they got there. Why did they go? And so in the 14th century, the Franciscans returned to the Holy Land and began acquiring properties in the Holy Land. Now, we're way before 1948 when the Jews are going to return. So why do you think that they would even want to go to this desolate, know-nothing place that we've all read? I read Mark Twain's book. I read what he said. It was a barren, horrible, horrendous place. It never rained. You didn't want to go there. And so why do you think these Franciscan Catholics would go to the Holy Land and start buying up know-nothing land? Well, because Satan wanted to get there before Jesus did. He knows that the Jews are coming back, so he's going to try to buy it all up and keep them from coming. So I thought that was really interesting that the Franciscans and who they are is they're a group, a religious order within the Catholic Church. They were founded by St. Francis of Assisi in 1209, and they're known for their commitment to poverty, humility, and service to others, following the example of their founder. The Franciscans emphasized living a simple life, helping the poor, and spreading peace and goodwill. But evidently, even in the 14th century, they had a large money backing to set out to buy up the Holy Land.
I'm thinking, if they are into poverty and simple living, how do they have the resources to help the poor?
Bingo!
They're not.
Because that's a ploy to get people to give them all
Yes.
their
There
belongings.
you go.
Exactly.
When you look at Erasmus, who is the reason we have the King James Authorized Version of the Bible today, he's the one that put the Masoretic text together, and he used a lot of what was in the eastern part of the church. God had preserved the Word. He was a contemporary of Martin Luther. Martin Luther had a falling out with him because he said, the Catholic Church is wrong, and he should leave it like he did. But there's been some that have, and I kind of think this could be a very reason why he never did leave it. First off, he was considered probably the most intelligent man in all of Europe, Erasmus.
Wow.
But upon becoming 12 years old and entering the priesthood, he gave up all his inheritance. And by the way, his father was the wealthiest man in Europe. That went to the Catholic Church. So it could be that kind of made him mad, but by staying in the Catholic Church, he had access to every library throughout the entire continent of Europe and even the Middle East. And that gave him access. God knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
But that's how they did it. And today, they still get a lot of money when people will leave, especially devout Catholics will leave much of their inheritance still to the Catholic Church. It's wealthier than most countries, the papacy.
So I hear all the time that the Antichrist is going to come out of the revived Roman Empire. How often do you hear that? Okay, if you listen to anything prophecy, you're going to hear that over and over again. And this is taken from Daniel chapter 2 and 7, and the vision of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw and the beast. And then in Revelation 13, it describes the beast. But as Pastor pointed out recently, and I sure find this interesting, and I hope you do too, that these particular scriptures that talk about the revived Roman Empire and the beast, there's no nations mentioned. So if you study prophecy at all, you know that in many other places where prophecy is talked about, nations are listed. And we know pretty much what those nations are today. But not in this case. Not when it talks about the revived Roman Empire. So also the phrase revived Roman Empire is not in the Bible. So the idea, though, is that this powerful government will rise with a powerful leader, and it will dominate the world during the end times. So right now, because the disrespect by Ukraine Zelensky to the U.S., Trump, as far as I know, has backed off of the deal. And I know they're still working on that and working on some kind of peace thing. But he had backed off of working with Zelensky, and now Europe is coalescing to take the place of the U.S. and to back Ukraine out of fear of Russia. And but see, they're not strong economically. They're not strong militarily. And I know from David in Germany that Germany is talking about the new whatever they call him, leader of Germany. He's talking about reinstating a draft because he's afraid that Germany's going to have to fight Russia. So our pastor doesn't believe there's time enough for a European nation to expand militarily fast enough to be able to fight Russia on their own. So this revived Roman Empire has various interpretations. So what I want to say is nobody knows. Nobody. Okay? And when I hear people emphatically saying where the Antichrist is going to come from and what they think is the Roman Empire, and they'll tell you emphatically, I just tune that out because nobody knows. Right. And but the beast in Daniel 7 we know is the Roman Empire, and it is countries coming together, but Daniel then sees this little horn rising up, and we know that that's the Antichrist. So this man will come out of whatever is the revived Roman Empire, or this group of nations that come together in power to fight God. But we just don't know what nations those are because God didn't say. And so the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, it's understood that the iron legs represented the Roman Empire, and the feet, made of partly iron and partly of baked clay, represent this final world empire.
Robbie made a good observation that, see, the Roman Empire became eastern and western part of the one empire. You had the western capital was Rome, the eastern capital was Constantinople. But when you understand what was the whole purpose of the Roman Empire was to rule the world. Yeah. And one of the things I found interesting is when that 8th grade girl, back when Obama was president, traced the lineage of all the U.S. presidents, all but 2, went directly back through the 5 crown heads of Europe, most of them through the British crown. The British crown is the oldest standing crown in the world. There's been a king or queen on that for almost 1,800 years now, 1,600 years, something like that. And they believe that the scepter of power resides, it's called heraldry. They believe they are an extension of the Jewish throne, England. Now what's interesting about that is the Antichrist will come out of the revived Roman Empire, but and even I, early on, I used to think, I just thought of those nations that were part of the original empire. But it doesn't list any nations there. It just says it will be revived. Do you realize our nation's capital is the only capital?
Jeff, you're getting ahead of me.
Oh, okay. Go
I'm
ahead.
gonna go to all that. I'm gonna
Okay,
cover
go
all
ahead.
that. So the iron shows that it shares a connection to Rome. And the verses in Revelation show us the power that this beast has. And who's he empowered by? Satan. All right, and so I'm telling you this because I want us to understand that nobody really knows yet. And I listen to well-respected Christian podcasters every day who are obsessed with the Antichrist coming out of the revived Roman Empire, meaning that the Antichrist will come out of Europe. That's what they say. He will come out of Europe. They are expecting somebody, some great leader to come out of Europe. But one commentator that I read said this, quote, "We know the Antichrist is coming, and we know he will have some connection to the ancient Roman Empire, possibly through ancestry, geography, or the structure of his government. We can read the signs of the times, but we don't know enough to be dogmatic in the details." Yes.
Well, go on, because I don't want to steal your thunder, but.
Well, I would, since he took a moment to interrupt you, I think the guy covered all the potential bases. What did he gave, what, 3 possibilities? What's
Yeah,
that?
he's gonna come through either coming
Alien?
out of the ancient Roman Empire, either through ancestry, like Joe was saying, through geography, those actual nations, which I'm gonna talk about in a second, or I thought this one was the most interesting.
Yes.
Or the structure of the government. So now,
What I was going to say on that, I won't do it because I know you're gonna cover it. But not only did she was able to trace back, but the 5 crown heads of Europe trace their lineage directly back to the 7 founding families of Rome. The founding families of Rome said they went back to the Spartans. It's interesting, the Spartans were never Greek. The other Greek states will tell you, they arrived sometime around 200 AD or something like that, and they went on the peninsula there and founded their own society. And they are traced back in 187 BC, actually it was before, yeah, I had the dates wrong. They were founded about 200 BC, the Spartans ended up in what we call modern Greece today. In 187 BC, I believe it was, their king sent a letter to the high priest of Israel, okay, letting them know that if they ever needed help, they would come to their aid because they were of Jewish descent themselves from the tribe of Dan. Now the Spartans will tell you their ancestors were the Trojans. And the Trojans were started by the tribe of Dan. Interesting enough, the tribe of Dan was always one of those, of the 12 tribes, easily, did you? were you
yes, I was gonna cover
All right,
that.
well, you go on from that, just keep that in mind.
All right, so I looked up to see what comprised the old Roman Empire. I don't know, right? And so I looked it up. So I'm going to read you these, and some of them I never heard of, and I know I'm going to butcher it, but oh well. So in Europe, okay, this is the old Roman Empire. In Europe, it was Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, Slovenian, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and parts of the United Kingdom. Middle East. This is all a part of the Roman Empire. Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and parts of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And then North Africa. Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco.
Wow.
Rome conquered all these areas. And this is the Roman Empire. So I looked up the phrase revived Roman Empire. And this is what it said. And I think I have a slide on this one. Suggests that a political, economic, or cultural entity resembling the ancient Roman Empire will emerge in the future, playing a significant role in end times events. So it could be political, economic, or cultural entity that resembles the ancient Roman Empire.
Or all 3 of them.
Or all 3 of them.
What's missing is any correlation to religion.
Well, there is none, because that's what I wanted you to see. These are all polytheistic heathen nations. Christianity was started with Christ in Rome at the crucifixion, and Jews, of course, started from Abraham. Yes.
Well, go on, because
All right, so-
I want to say, but I don't want.
So notice that it said is political, economic, or cultural entity resembling the ancient Roman Empire. So resembling the ancient Roman Empire. Keep that in mind. And so I cannot see myself these nations that I listed all coming back together politically. Can you?
Right,
Can you see them coming back together economically? No. Do you see them coming back together religiously?
no.
Okay, and so to me, this defies logic. That you know, like the old Roman Empire, that they are just gonna, they're just all gonna sing Kumbaya and come back together. Okay, and so I can't see this happening, but I sure can see a nation or nations resembling the ancient Roman Empire, right? And so you may have heard from our pastor that the U.S. resembles and is modeled after the ancient Roman Empire. Well, if not, if you hadn't heard him say it, just stick around because he'll say it. And so the similarities are in the influence of each. So the Roman Empire and the U.S. over much of the known world are known over much of the world for their politics, their economy, their military, and they were both superpowers. And so another way the U.S. is like the old Roman Empire, as the U.S. began as a republic.
No, as a kingdom.
Okay,
The first 500 years of Rome's history, remember Rome existed in the West for over 1,000 years. It existed almost 3,000 years when you count the Eastern Empire didn't succumb to the Islamic Turks until around 1400 something AD.
well, I wasn't talking about Rome, I was talking about the U.S., but go ahead.
Well, this is where I'm going with that. Is, oh no, I forgot what I was gonna say. You have to go on and I
It'll come back.
jump in there, because it's very applicable.
Well, whenever the U.S. became a republic,
Oh, okay, that's what I'm saying. The
which I know we
similarities
weren't.
there is they started as a king, under a king.
Yes.
What did the United States start as?
Oh,
We were British colonies for over almost 300 years. We were under a king. We became a republic. Rome became a republic. They had a bicameral house just like we do. You don't hear a lot. You always hear about the Roman senators because they were the true power. But you had a house of plebes that represented the ordinary people that were elected also. And then they became an empire. Our nation's capital.
Yeah, please.
Okay, sorry.
This is why I don't let him come. And for anybody listening online, we're married, so I'm not being ugly. This is,
Yes, she's
you
being
know,
ugly to the
you know. Anyway, I stand corrected that we started under king, and I know that, and then we became a republic. But my point was the republic. Where did we get the republic? It was based on Rome. And so we elected representatives with checks and balances. That's what Rome did. So the United States Constitution itself drew inspiration from Roman principles, such as this is where we get the Senate, and this is where, because Rome was known for their politics and their Senate and all that, and that's where we got that. Rome was known for their infrastructure. They were known for their roads, for their aqueducts. They were known for their public buildings, which facilitated their growth. And so the U.S. has similarly invested in extensive infrastructure. They become a leader in innovation, and you're hearing that from Musk and Trump. We got to go to the, Mars. We got to do it. We got to innovate. That's how we keep our superpower
I
status.
don't have this, but since 1900, 90% of all patents in the world were issued from the United States and Great Britain.
Yeah, I
Predominantly most from the United States.
didn't know anybody else had patents besides the United States.
Israel. But so what I want you to see is how that Roman culture spread throughout the empire. And now you know what that empire was, and it truly was an empire. And guess what? Their language spread throughout the empire. Their architecture spread. Their entertainment spread. Their technology spread. And so the Roman Empire was literally a melting pot of cultures.
They
of-
influenced the world
Yes.
as the United States
Exactly.
influences the world.
Exactly. So, and Rome was known as a military power, just like the United States is. So, in fact, Washington, D.C. has a very heavy Roman influence in architecture, as well as in Roman ideals based on the Roman Republic. So, here are a couple of examples. Can I give them?
Yeah.
Because he was trying to get ahead of me.
We're the only nation's capital that is designed on that pattern.
Exactly.
No
So
other
the
nation's capital is designed that.
So the U.S. Capitol building, that grand dome and the use of columns are inspired Roman architecture. The Capitol symbolizes democracy, much like the Roman Senate. You want to say anything else about that?
No, go ahead.
All right, the Supreme Court building. It's designed in a neoclassical style. It features Corinthian columns and resembles a Roman temple, emphasizing justice and law. The Lincoln Memorial is modeled after a Roman temple, and it uses Doric columns and exudes a sense of permanence and reverence. Union Station, its design incorporates Roman arches and vaulted ceilings inspired by Batas of Diocletian and the Arch of Constantine. The National Mall, the layout of DC itself with its wide avenues and public spaces echoes the urban landing of ancient Rome. The English language, although a Germanic language, has a significant Latin influence. Over 60% of English words are Latin-based.
And I want to say this. Greek was the known language of the Roman Empire, Koine Greek. But they did business based on Rome. The world does business. In fact, anywhere you go in the world, businessmen speak what? English. The world does business in English,
And English
and primarily
currency.
English.
And American currency.
Yeah.
Well, how would you, or anybody here, say that America's trying to rule? Maybe economically, but Rome wanted to conquer everything. And they conquer religion by Catholicism. They want to conquer all the other peoples to spread, but U.S. really isn't geared towards conquering.
Actually, the U.S. is an empire, and I'll tell you why. How many military bases do you think?
Which I'm gonna cover that too.
Okay, go ahead.
So take the obelisk.
Those are defensive.
It's called the,
More than
And
that.
I was just, when you're talking about all this architecture, and I've heard that before, but thinking about other countries in Europe, I don't think I recall any of them having that Roman architecture.
No, they don't. They may have some semblance here and there, but nothing like we do.
Yeah.
Our capital was designed specifically with that in
Yes.
mind. And can I say this about what's performed every time a president
Yeah,
takes
go
the
ahead.
oath of office?
yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
I've talked about that
Yeah,
before,
yeah,
but
you
in
talked
the,
about that.
in the Scottish Rite National Headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the 33rd degree Masons perform the same ritual that the priest of Karnak performed when the new emperor or new pharaoh was enthroned. And that, what they do is they call up the spirit of Osiris to enter the man who is now president, just as they did the pharaoh, because they believe the United States was founded with the sole purpose of bringing the one world leader that they've been working to get here for thousands of years.
The
The
Freemasons
Antichrist?
believe that?
The Masons do.
Yeah.
And
The Antichrist?
that's who we'd be. Now think about
But they
this.
don't call him that, the one world leader.
No, that's what
they
the
say
world
he's
is
the son
pining
of
for.
Lucifer. They actually, when you hit that 33rd degree level, you know you're actually worshiping Lucifer. They believe Lucifer is the true God of the Bible, and the God that we worship, that Christians worship, is the usurper.
But all the globalists are waiting for their one man to rule the world. They'll tell you that. So, all right, then take the Washington Monument. It's an obelisk. And the obelisk began in Egypt. It was constructed to honor the sun god Ra. So right there in our Washington Monument, we have an idol.
Well, it represents the male penis.
Yes, and the Romans admired the Egyptian obelisk, and they brought several of them to Rome, where they erected them in prominent locations and later creating more in Rome. And the city of Rome itself had 13 ancient obelisks, the most in the world, and 8 of them were Egyptian obelisks, and then 5 ancient Roman obelisks, plus more modern ones. And so you'll find obelisks everywhere. Once Barbara, I told her about what that is. It's the male member. That's what it stands for. You'll see it everywhere. You'll see it in museums, parks, cemeteries. They're everywhere.
And what you have to understand, when they do that ritual, they believe that the spirit of Osiris is emanated through that monument and enters, because the dome is the womb of Isis, where the new leader is impregnated with the spirit of Osiris. Every president has had that, whether they realize it or not, has had that performed on them.
And you'll often see water near an obelisk.
And water plays a key role.
And water, I think, is the womb, and so you'll oftentimes see those paired up as you do in Washington. So like our pastor always points out, DC is heavily influenced by Roman style and art, and many of the DC buildings, as I pointed out, are in the style of Roman architecture. And beside the podium of the Speaker of the House of Representatives chamber in the Capitol stands 2 staves. If you watched his speech,
Faces, is that what it's called?
they're called staves. And when you, if you watch the speech recently, you'll see them. They're standing right side by where the speaker sits and the vice president sits. Those are ancient Roman symbols of authority and power. And so those things are said to evoke the principles of Roman republicanism and the rule of law. And that's just a taste of what's there.
Speaking to Chris, when he asked the question about multiple gods, do you realize there's not one monument in DC that has any biblical character on it?
Okay,
They
I
are-
wasn't gonna say anything, but I went to Washington, and I told Leah, I remember looking around, and I would think, there'd be, just the dramatic, whatever, statues or something, and I would think, what does that have to do with America? Like with freedom, with Christianity, with, it was something, it was like gargoyles and, it's just
Well,
weird.
it's false gods.
Right,
Even across, you have the 10 Commandments, but across even the Supreme Court building is gods of Roman Greco gods and goddesses. When you enter the Capitol Dome and you look up there, you see 72 stars. They're actually pentagrams. And you'll see it's called the Apotheosis of Washington, because they believe he ascended and became God. That's in our own capital. And around him are all these Roman Greco gods and goddesses. So we are pagan. Now, did our country, was it always this way? No, because of the freedoms our founding fathers gave us, God used that to propel the gospel, and he used that to, with the gospel going across our land, we became a Christian nation for a while. I don't think we were ever in the majority. I don't think true believers have ever been in the majority, but there was enough of us that we salted the culture, we salted the population, so people lived by that ethos, by those commandments, by the ethics of Christianity.
And even those who weren't true believers, they still went along with the whole concept.
Because they had a sense of morality about it.
They had the sense of morality, they would claim to be Christians, they would go to church and go through all the motions, even if they weren't true believers.
Yeah.
It was still upheld as the ideal in America.
All right, go on, Leah.
So Rome was an imperialist, and that is oh wait, I skipped. So I actually read this. It's a quote. These elements were intentionally chosen to connect the United States to the ideals of the Roman Republic, such as governance, civic duty, and the rule of law. It's fascinating how these influences continue to shape the identity of the nation. continue today. It's not dead and gone. It's still continuing today to shape the nation. So Rome was an imperialist, and that is a Latin word imperium, and it refers to a nation or state implanting its rule on other states. I think that goes along with what Chris is saying, okay? Has not the United States government implanted its rule into all the states?
Not so much by military conquest
No.
as Rome did.
Exactly.
But influence,
Yes,
yes. We have
exactly.
certainly influenced the world with our music, our
Everything.
That's right.
Everything
So
else.
it says imperium means to implant its rule on other states, treating them as subordinates and in an inferior fashion.
I got something to add about it. It's our economic power.
yeah.
The world does business in dollars. The dollar's not gonna be supplanted by another world currency. Trump's gonna make sure of that. And here's the other reason. All our currency has changed over the years, has it not? Except one bill. It's been almost the same for 100 years now.
Dollar bill?
The dollar bill. You know why?
It's insignificant because it's.
Nope. It is the talisman. And where I'm going with this, in the Illuminati and the Masons and everything, that carries power. That has mysticism attached to it, has mystic power, and that's why it will never change, because that's the power of our currency. Notice it has the all-seeing eye. By the way, Vice President Wallace, who was under FDR, was not only a 33rd degree Mason, but he was also a satanic occultist. And he was the one that was instrumental under the authority and the command of FDR to bring about that $1 bill, because FDR was a 33rd degree Mason. You'd be surprised how many of our presidents were 33rd degree Masons. Harry Truman was one. You can go down and see him at what was called the Little White House in Key West, in the Keys. And there he is in the full 33rd degree regalia, Harry Truman, with the apron on and everything. Yes, they all taught Sunday school, they did this, but they were not Christian. Go ahead, please.
All right, talking about the United States ruling the world, do I need to say anything about Canada and Greenland?
Go ahead.
No, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying we are an empire.
An extension of it.
Whether we do it through money or whether we do it through military, we are a world empire. So, did you know that the U.S. plays a role in all major shipping ports with our Navy? And this literally keeps trade flowing, and we have 600 military bases around the world. And the greatest empires have always been maritime. And so Rome had the Mediterranean, the British Empire, which is an island in the North Atlantic. It was built on naval power, and the U.S. sea power played a significant role in defeating them in the American Revolution. So the ancient Romans, they didn't start out as a sea power, but they were, land, but they realized the importance of the naval power, and then they rapidly built a fleet, and they developed naval tactics that served them well in conquering more peoples and protecting trade routes. Now, where have you heard all this trade route talked about? Well, Trump. That's why he wants to take Greenland back, because he's all about the trade routes.
Panama Canal.
And the
which is
Panama
stupid
Canal,
that
exactly.
Carter gave it away.
So what Rome did was they kept the trade routes open, they combated piracy, and then it all supported their military campaign. It's nothing new, we're doing the same thing.
I believe the Roman Empire, it just won't be North America, it will include Europe. Because of all the people groups of the world, we share the most in common. Because why? We were settled by the Europeans, the Dutch, the English primarily, but you had French influence, and you had the Scandinavian countries, and you had the Germanic countries, you had the British Isles. We're all from them, most of the Americans are still from them.
Yeah.
All right, so the U.S. is patterned after Rome, and we are world leaders, but did you know, and I thought this was so interesting, that Great Britain, in the not so distant past, at one time, they were the world leader. And literally, they went down the tubes after 1948 when they didn't support Israel and they didn't keep their promise to make Israel a sovereign nation. And literally, very quickly, they began to deteriorate as a world empire. Today, Great Britain, their navy, is the same size as it was in the 1700s.
Wow.
1740s.
Canada, their entire military consists of 67,400 active duty personnel. So, can you think of any European nation that can compare to the United States? And could this be why there are no nations listed in Daniel chapter, in the Daniel prophecy? And could the Antichrist just might come out of America, which is the modern day resemblance of the ancient Roman Empire? I don't know, but I'm saying it's something to think about. Nobody knows. And so could this be why the United States is not mentioned in the Bible? And I think so. And so to me it makes sense now that the false prophet prophesied will be a pope from the city on the seven hills, from the Vatican, from Rome, a Catholic.
That we're sure of, because there's
Yes.
only one city in antiquity, and the Holy Spirit was specific and had John be specific. Because John goes, what is, that city is that one that sits on seven hills.
So I said all that to say nobody knows. And so when I hear someone emphatically stating things about the Antichrist, I just ignore that because they don't know.
So this,
Because nobody knows.
the Seven Hills stuff is Rome?
Is
Yes.
It's Rome, yeah.
So it was a common belief among,
And it's interesting because she causes all nations to commit fornication. That's talking about spiritual,
Adultery.
worshiping idols, not worshiping
Yeah.
the one true God. And if there's been any pseudo-Christian religion that has done that, that's been the Catholic Church. That's why she was expanded so quickly, because every people group that she went in to witness incorporated their gods. Look at Mexico. They got they celebrate with the skeleton.
Cinco de
what is it?
Mayo.
No, the dead, the Day of the Dead and
I thought that
everything.
was Cinco
The
de
day before
Mayo.
Halloween.
That goes back to ancient Aztecs and the Mayans.
Yeah, yeah.
Dead ancestors, the worship of dead ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a common belief among Christians during the first century AD, and that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan, like Pastor said, and this is because Dan was left out of the list of tribes in the Bible that the 144,000 saved Jews are gonna be taken from, and that's in Revelation 7:4-8. When it lists the tribes, Dan is not there. So again, nobody knows for sure, but Trump is said, like Pastor said, that he goes back to the tribe of Dan on his mother's side. I'm never gonna get done.
Well, that's all right.
And I thought this was really interesting, and I was going to go into more detail, but I'm not now. That to be considered a Jew does not come from your father's side, it comes from your mother's side. And I read it on a Jewish website, and it's very interesting. I've got the article, like I said, I was going to go into it, but I don't have time. And anyway, so the bottom line is we won't know who the Antichrist is, right? Until the covenant is signed with Israel and the Antichrist, and of course we're not going to be here. But Israel is looking for a descendant of David that's going to first unite them and then restore all the Jews to Israel and then bring peace to the world. But back to our subject of ancient hatred. Let me say this first though. Did you see, and now it was on a reputable site, I saw it, that on March 4th, 2005, the Vatican confirmed it, that the Pope in the hospital was yelling at demons all afternoon. When a portal, that's what they said, when a
Not
portal,
March, 2025.
2025, what did I say?
2005.
Oh, 2025. Okay, so the Pope in the hospital was yelling at demons all afternoon when a portal opened at the foot of his bed and he cried out, "Get these bastards away from me."
Wow.
I'll leave you with that. Don't know whether it's true or not, but that's what I read.
Well, that's on the Catholic website.
So it was on a news website. So anyway, Catholicism in the Roman Empire became the rival of Jews and Christians making different claims about faith in God. So later, with Catholicism transforming into the official state religion of the Roman Empire, well, that's when persecution, economic persecution, social persecution, cultural persecution, and political discrimination followed. All right, but so unique in the Jewish Catholic confrontation, though, was the charge that the Jews had killed the Christian God. And the Gospel of Matthew says, on Matthew 27:25, it says, "Then answered all the people, his blood be on us and on our children."
Yeah.
See, so they said this to Pilate.
Yeah.
And who was really trying not to execute Jesus. But the Jews, see, they didn't single-handedly kill Jesus, but Pilate would have let him go, and had they not insisted. So the Jews took this responsibility upon themselves, and they cursed every future generation of Jews. And it didn't change until the Second Vatican Council of 1964, where they absolved the Jews of blame for the crucifixion and rejected the centuries-old slanderous teaching of contempt, which was used to fuel anti-Semitism.
I just want to remind you that it wasn't a murder, it was a sacrifice.
I was going to say that.
Okay.
So now today,
I'm out of my office.
thank you, because we'll be here till 5 o'clock. So now today, I can't be responsible for slavery. You can't blame me, for slavery. Okay, so I can't hold a Jew responsible for killing Jesus. That's ridiculous. And neither, can I say that the religious Jews, no, I can't blame anybody. And so, but I said all that to say that at one time, this fact alone, that the Jews killed Jesus, was a huge point of prejudice and contention. And it got started from the Catholic Church. They're the ones who started it. So Jews would not accept Jesus as Savior. And see, this became a larger and larger issue as Rome began to accept this new religion of Christianity. It started out as Christianity, and then it morphed into Catholicism. So all this, I hope, starts to make sense to you why the Jews began to be persecuted. And particularly during the Middle Ages, as Catholicism was rooted in this mixture of religious, social, and political factors from ancient times. And they often portray Jews as responsible for the death of Jesus. Catholicism, as it took a greater hold, they were absolutely despised, the Jews were. And they even formalized various measures to segregate them and to limit their Jewish rights, or their rights in general. And over time, this became literally a part of the Catholic Church. And they restricted Jews from owning land. They restricted their employment. They forced Jews to live in segregated areas called ghettos, or wear identifying clothing. Does all that sound familiar? This all came from the Catholics. And it's important to note that the Bible doesn't place collective blame on the Jewish people for Jesus' death. For just as Pastor said, for Jesus said, I gave my life. Nobody took it from me. He said, I gave it.
Forgave the enemies on the cross.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it was all our fault. Because we all sinned, and that's how come he had to sacrifice his
Exactly.
right.
But nobody really killed him. He says, I gave it. I gave my life. Nobody really took it. I gave it. So based on biblical teaching, Christians and Catholics were prohibited from charging interest on loans. And you may have heard this, it's called usury.
Yeah.
And so the church, see, they ruled everything. This was the government. These are laws, okay? The church ruled. And so the church enforced this rule strictly, and they viewed this practice of loaning money at interest as a sin. So the Jews were barred from many of the trades. They couldn't be farmers. They couldn't have land. There was many of the trades they couldn't do. And so they had to have a way of making a living. So Jews were not bound, interestingly, by this religious teaching against loaning money to Gentiles. They couldn't loan it to one another, but they could loan it to Gentiles. So they began loaning money. And since they couldn't own any property, this propelled the whole Jewish culture into areas of finance and banking.
Wow.
This is where that comes from, and this is where that phrase, the greedy Jew, comes from. And of course, they're blessed, because whatever they do, they're going to be blessed. And so in 1962, during the Second Vatican Council, which you hear a lot about if you're into Catholic stuff and Catholic circles, they made that decision to collectively stop blaming the Jews for Jesus' death. And then the Second Vatican Council is said to have brought modernizing changes and fostered dialogue with other Christian denominations and religions. That's when they really started reaching out to other religions. And it was then that the lot of the prejudices against the Jews was dropped. That was only in 1962.
Wow.
And so, but see, what I want you to see is they missed the whole point that Jesus laid down his life. They didn't take it. The Jews didn't take it. He laid it down. So going back further, we hear a lot about the destruction of the Second Temple, right, as Christians in AD 70, because Jesus foretold it. He told them that this was going to happen. But do we know why it happened? All right, so the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70 was a result of the Roman siege of Jerusalem, which was during the First Jewish and Roman War, which was 66 to 73 AD. So, as a side note, we're seeing more and more years. If you've noticed, if you do any studying, they're all writing it instead of AD and BC. They're writing it CE.
Yeah, that makes me mad.
Yeah. Well, what it is an AD and CE stands for Common Era, and they say that's not to offend anybody. That's why you're starting to see that. And
what bugs me about it is even Christian writers will use that terminology.
I know it's terrible. I won't do it.
I won't
So AD stands for, it's Latin, and it stands for in the year of our Lord.
Yes.
So see, that's offensive. So that's why they changed it. But anyway, this war began as a Jewish revolt. The Jews started it against the Roman rule. Why? Because they were being oppressed. They were being overtaxed. There was all this religious tension and anti-Semitism. They wanted to be a part of, they wanted to be away from Rome. And so they started this revolt. And this rebellion initially did see some success by the Jews, but then the Romans, led by General Titus, they launched a massive campaign to crush it. And they struck them in the heart by destroying the center of their very existence, which was what? The temple. And the temple, was where at one time God dwelled. So the destruction of that temple just literally had profound consequences on the Jews, on their culture, their history, their religion, and it was the beginning of the diaspora, where they were spread out throughout the earth. And many Jews fled to Babylon, Greece, and Egypt. And this is where they began to turn to rabbis and to preserve their religion and their way of life, because they had no temple anymore.
What time frame was
That was in 516 BC. 70 AD.
78.
So this brings to light in my mind, to bring it back to America, the ingeniousness of America to start a country with religious freedom. And although, yes, it really goes back to Rome and their pattern of initially allowing conquered people to worship their own gods, as long as they didn't cause trouble. And I said before, sometimes they even incorporated other religions into theirs, which, if you think about it, just makes sense, right? And but in how later they morphed it into Catholicism, a form of Christianity, I guess you could say, because they do bring Jesus into it. But if a religion, was seen as a threat, then it wasn't tolerated. And so it was a give and take relationship in Rome to some extent. So Christians and Jews, though, they were unbending and they were unwilling. And they would not pay obeisance in any shape, way, or form to the Romans' leadership, to their gods, to bringing themselves under this horrible persecution. Or that did bring them into this horrible persecution. But see, America was built on this same ideal. And it was at least the first 1,000 years modeled of worshiping whomever and whatever, as long, you know, in Rome, as long as you didn't disturb others and threaten the government or worship, and as long as you worship their Caesar or their emperor as God. So they had also experienced themselves religious tyranny in Britain, and everyone was expected to belong to the Church of England. See, the Catholics were persecuted in Britain, in England, because it was the Church of England. So you got this rift there between the religions, and there the Catholics were persecuted. So the model that America formed, in theory, was very good, based on Rome. Just que sera, sera. You know, you worship whoever you want. You as long as you don't bother anybody, as long as you don't hurt anybody, as long as you don't cause disruption. But guess what? It never works.
No,
Why does it not work?
you can't blend the two.
You can't blend, and Satan won't. He won't even allow you to get along, no matter what.
And you must remember, what time frame do we live in church history?
The
We
layout
live
is
in the last
just-
stage of the church history under the Gentiles, and that is the Laodicean church. It's the church of compromise. You'll see a lot of, one of the things that I find intriguing is we see a movement to the right in this country, which on one hand that's good, but on the other hand, it's not to Jesus, it's to patriotism, it's to God, in quotations. Who Trump is surrounding himself with is by word of faith preachers. Paula White's one of their rising stars in the word of faith movement. And where I'm going with that is they accept everybody that says they believe in God, but they will never accept ones that believe in Jesus Christ as the only way to heaven. Because we're in the Laodicean church age. So, I guess I say that all to say this. I thought what Leah brought up about our freedom of religion, that really was a pattern of Rome. I thought that was excellent, I've never thought of that before, but it really is. We're
So,
right here at the precipice of the rapture of the church.
and I promise I'm coming to an end, but in summation, so we know that the ancient hatred among all peoples is spawned by Satan. But Jews only make up 0.2%. 0.2% of the world's population. And it's in all honesty a spiritual battle to defeat God. It makes no sense otherwise. So Satan wants Israel destroyed, knowing that Jesus will rule and reign from Jerusalem very soon. And he knows that Jews are God's chosen people. It doesn't matter whether they're in rebellion against God or not. They are still his people. God still has a purpose for them. And the tribulation is all about them.
Yes.
It's not about us. It's about them. And it's about the Jew. It's about the promised land. It's about Israel. So you cannot separate Christianity from the Jew and from Israel. It all goes together. So the Bible is clear about God's view on Israel and the Jew. And I just want to say this. If anybody listening that's a Christian and you're prejudiced against the Jew, and you don't believe maybe that today's Jews are really Jews, because I hear that, and you don't believe that they're God's chosen people, you don't believe they're the original descendants of Abraham, ignoring the fact that I read that they can trace some, not all, but some, one particular, and I can't remember what they called them, anyway, Jews, back to 4 women, 4 Jewish women. And they can, so your DNA, now it's not everybody, but they can do that. And again, it all goes on the mother's side. And so if you're a Christian and you hate Israel, or you're for the Palestinians, which we personally know somebody who says they're a Christian, they used to come to here, this church, they hate Jews, they left, I don't think they'll fit in here. I suggest you do a study of the Word about what God says about Israel, because this is a spiritual war. And you can be very well educated and get this wrong and lose out with God.
Amen.
So I want to read Galatians 5:13 through 14. It says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." So Barbara sent me a video of a young Jewish man who snuck into Gaza to do some street interviews, and he looks more Italian. And so he asked women of all ages what they thought of the October 7th attack on Israel and in Gaza, and every single one of them was supportive. And then he asked them about the tactics used, what they thought about the tactics used, and they all said it was fine. So, see, no Christian can support this inhumane and torturous treatment of anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, and especially of civilians, even in war. And so I want you to look at the times that Arabs have attacked Israel and count how many times they won. And it's pretty clear, whose side God's on. And then look at the battles in the Bible and count how many times the enemy won. And if they did win, read why. And so if you do a proper study with a willingness to view this ancient as well as modern supernatural hatred, then the Holy Spirit may just have the leeway to change your mind if you're leaning towards the wrong side. So as Christians, we have to guard our hearts from all prejudice, from all hatred, but especially prejudice against the Jews in Israel. Because if you're prejudiced against Israel, you're prejudiced against the apple of God's eye, because that's what he says in God's word. And I don't think that that's where you want to find yourself, on the wrong side of God and on the wrong side of his ultimate plan. So God said to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for these Jews. Pray for the Jews all over the world, because they're being persecuted right now, again. And he said that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling to the whole world. And how can you pray for the peace of Jerusalem if you hate the Jew? Or you hate Israel? You can't. So I just want to leave you with this thought. King David said he would not harm King Saul because he was anointed and chosen by God. So should we not have that same attitude towards that entire race that God himself chose, called and anointed for his purpose? And we actually got done.
Yay.
So does anybody have any questions or comments?
Just really meaty. Hello there.
That was very good. Oh my gosh, a lot of good stuff.
And, you trace the roots back, it could have went farther. I mean, we've been
Yes.
reading about it in the Old Testament. I mean, the Jews are persecuted.
But see, now you know why. Because that polytheism and monotheism just could not find common ground. It just was
Well,
Well, the
impossible.
same way we can't today.
Yeah,
We can
exactly.
only find so much
Notice-
common ground without denying
Notice-
Jesus.
Yes.
You can mention God all you want, and even mention morality. But you bring Jesus into the equation, they don't like that.
I was going to go into hospice and be a hospice chaplain, and then I found out you have to minister to every religion, Muslim, Catholic, everything. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. Well, then I can't do the job. So I just talked to somebody who was another Church of God minister's wife, and she's a chaplain at the hospital. And so I asked her, well, do you have to minister to, she said, yes. She said, as much as I can. And then she said, then I'm to bring somebody else in of that religion if I need to. Well, I can't do that. I mean, I just can't. And I'm not faulting her, but what can I, if they're dying and they're on their deathbed and they're Muslim or something, I mean, I can't go up there and comfort them in Allah.
No,
I can't even pretend that.
because they're on their way to hell, and the only way to stop that is Jesus.
Exactly.
What, is that not what's happening in the Pope's, what's the word I'm looking for? Illusions that he suffered? isn't he not being confronted with his ultimate demise? And he-
Oh,
Yeah, I
if-
think
if
so.
that's
they
true, I
saw-
think it's
he saw
definitely-
demons coming to get him.
Yes. Absolutely.
You want to say anything else?
Yeah, does anybody else have anything to say?
Happy birthday, Diane.
Yeah, happy birthday, Diana.
Debbie sent me birthday greetings, and I said, well, I'm at Preppers, and she said to tell everybody hi.
Oh, okay. Hey,
And send
Debbie.
hugs to everybody.
Debbie's doing real good in Michigan.
And she's got a new job at a hospital.
Yes.
Who we talking about?
Debbie Chandler, Joanne's sister.
Joanne, you used to see Joanne here some, and she's the one that got me the health insurance signed up for the health insurance.
All righty. Let's see.